that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And I know that might sound challenging, right? And it's more because it essentially adds another 300 some words to the essay, right? So it's more, but for those of you at least that want to go on to the C1001 or plan to transfer, like very realistically, it might just be one paper you do for a class, but it's probably going to be 10 to 20 pages, right? And so the more, there's the basic 5-paragraph essay, and we get locked into this, okay, three body paragraphs, my thesis is blank, 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 right? But we need to break that habit and learn how to like map out the ideas in a different way so that we can grow with the essays that we'll be asked to do in the future, right? At least if you're planning to transfer and all that. Question?
Nothing. I'm just trying to open outline essay 3, but I'm not able to copy and paste it because it keeps putting me into my personal Gmail, but when I try to switch to my school Gmail,
Okay.
it says I need access to it.
So don't even pull up anything right now, just don't worry about it. Let's just talk about this, okay? Now, one of the things that's super, super tempting for this assignment is people want to put little into one paragraph. And then they want to put the Chiron chapter in its own paragraph. And then black, right? Because it's 3 chapters of a film, right? And it's very convenient, right? And it falls into the way we think about essays. But what ends up happening is when people do that, because I always warn against it, but some people insist this is how they want to do it. I'm not going to stop you, right? You got to do what you can do. And I've seen people do okay with that. It's not that it can't be done, but generally what happens is we have 1, 2, 3 paragraphs, little, Chiron, black, and then, oh shit, I need a 4th paragraph. What am I going to do, right? And sometimes I'll say, okay, so what's going to be your 4th paragraph? And they'll say, well, I'm just going to bring together all 3 of these things into this paragraph. What happens probably?
Just repeat it.
It just repeats, right? So it ends up being a paragraph of summary of what you've already said. So you're just wasting everyone's time, right? So instead of thinking about the split in this way, and the other thing I should say is, so if you decide this is your little paragraph, that tends to restrict people, and all they think about, or all they think they can write about, is just that section, right? But when you're talking about a film and you want to talk about like, how does a character change from the beginning to the end? You might need a scene from one section and a scene from the end section to compare and contrast, right? And so I've known a lot of students who, they want to do that, but they'd say, well, I said this is little, so I can't talk about black, right? And so it restricts you from making some of those connections, I think, that do need to be made, okay? So, instead of this, let's put a big X through this, with a pen that writes. Okay. You want to use themes or concepts for your paragraph topics.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
So let's look at the assignment really quick. And this is just one way, but So, the cheat sheet also helps with this. It puts this in a sentence more or less the same way, I think. What you're being asked to do, okay, so your central focus is to write about moonlight, but think critically about how moonlight helps us understand this comment, right? So, this unit asks you to think critically about how individuals experience love and belonging within social systems that shape identity, vulnerability, and self-worth. Okay. So your thesis statement is going to be about moonlight, because moonlight's the thing that you're focusing on, right? So the question you could write yourself is, how does Chiron, I think that's probably the character most of us would focus on. How does Chiron experience love and belonging within social systems that shape identity, vulnerability, and self-worth? Okay. So maybe did everybody get the handout, right? I think so. So under here it says, what do you plan on proving in this essay? You see that? Write down the question, right, that you want to answer, right? How does Chiron experience, and then just copy this out. I'm going to change it. So I'll change it back. Can you guys read that okay? Did I pick up the question?
Yes. I can see that. A big hole.
And so that's what you want to prove, right? Now, one of the things that can help you get started is to structure your essay based on that question. So think about what concept or theme do you need to for your ideas to prove your ideas. Okay, so I took that sentence and I said, okay, well, how do they experience the social systems for all this other stuff? So let's start with the social system, right? So the first paragraph is going to be about Chiron's social system. But I'm not just going to describe it. I'm not just going to summarize it. I have to ask myself, okay, what do I want to prove about Chiron's social system? Now you can start to pick evidence from the film that targets that question. That make sense? Okay. But we need to think about how does that social system shape Chiron, right? So what does it do for his vulnerability? What does it do for his self-worth? What does it do for his identity, right? And these are just the three words that are in that sentence. Does that make sense? Okay. It doesn't have to be this order either, right? Because what you want to do is ask yourself, which idea needs to come first, second, third, fourth. Because sometimes what happens is, like we learned, we have to have 3-body paragraphs. And so people think about each paragraph in isolation as if that's one thing, and here's another thing, and here's another thing. But this isn't one paragraph. This is part of an overall argument, right? And since it's part of something larger, we want to show the best succession of it. There's no right answer to this. It's how does your brain work and make a logical sequence out of these ideas, right? So my thinking, so I picked this order. It could easily be like social system and then identity, and then vulnerability, and then self-worth, right? It could go any way. But when I was putting it down just as a way of thinking of the logic through, I thought, okay, well, the social system ultimately teaches him not to be vulnerable, right? And so maybe I have the first half shows how vulnerable he is, and then the second half of the paragraph talks about how his vulnerability was, like he was forced to change from being somebody who's vulnerable to someone who isn't going to lose a fight, basically, right? Right. But saying that it's not just a physical thing for him is that in order to not be vulnerable, he doesn't feel anymore, right? He shuts himself down. So vulnerability and that chapter 6 about trauma and how trauma affects the body and the mind would probably be a good piece to help talk about that shutdown. Okay, and that'll be more clear once you read the article if you haven't yet. Okay. So vulnerability leads to shutting down. To protect vulnerability, that vulnerability and the way he was treated then affects his self-worth, right? He doesn't understand as a kid why everyone's fucking with him, right? So he's asking these big questions of one, you know, am I gay, basically, right? Except he's using the F slur, right? He doesn't even know what it is, right? So all he knows is that whatever he is, everybody hates, right? So we can kind of see like being vulnerable creates this kind of self-worth, right? But once he's learned that and he protects himself from vulnerability, he protects that part of him, it doesn't make his self-worth any better because he doesn't really have any emotions in that third one, right? Not until Kevin pulls it out. And so when we think about this, then at the end, like, what is his identity? Right? And it goes through an evolution. Maybe this is a place where you have three pieces of evidence, and you talk about Little. What was his identity with Little? What was the identity with Chiron? And how does the film end with the identity of Black? And maybe this kind of talks about that evolution. Or something other. You know, there's just all kinds of possibilities, right? And then what happens is, instead of thinking of everything in isolation, when you're talking about the social system, he's in a social system for the whole film, because all of us are in a social system all our lives. It's the nature of being human, right? So you could pull from any part of the film to have your pieces of evidence, and it doesn't have to be just from one section. Right? So this gives you really a lot more flexibility too, I think. Questions so far?
It's not like, so supposedly, of course, we would have to go, like, for each paragraph, it doesn't matter if we go back to either Little, from like face Little to face Black. Like, for instance, on body paragraph number 1, I will cover mostly Chiron, like Chiron part 2, but then on another one I'll cover Little.
Yeah, so it doesn't have to be in the same order. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, don't worry about chronology, right? Maybe the first piece of evidence you give in your first body paragraph is about Black and the character that happens over here. And then you bring in maybe something about Little to compare the two, right? That's the other thing, is that if you go that way, it forces you to go in that time order, right? But the film, so the thing about communication is that it is by nature right now linear. We don't have any other way to communicate. And what I mean by that is you have to put one word in front of the other, and that line of conversation that becomes your sentences is something that's linear, right? Our head isn't linear. We have all of our ideas in our head, but if we need to communicate them, they come out one at a time. That make sense? That's even how computers work. It doesn't seem like it, but binary code is just zeros and ones in a line. Just really fucking fast. So, the trick of learning how to write an essay is learning how to take all of these ideas in our head and put them into a linear format that makes the most sense for somebody else to read. Does that answer your question at all?
Yeah, that definitely does.
Okay, okay. Other questions, other thoughts? Yeah.
So for the topics themselves, are we able to use those, or do we have to find our own?
So, you can use these, yes,
Okay.
but you gotta think about them. So, and what I mean by that, and I don't mean specifically you,
Right.
but
Right.
in this class in particular, and I think it's because you guys are a community of learners, right? And so you're in Julie's class, you're in this class, and so you guys talk about evidence together. And so I've noticed that sometimes there's a piece of evidence that everybody in the class uses at the same time. There's nothing wrong with that. But some people put it in because they don't know what else to do, and it doesn't have anything to do with what they're saying. It's just they know they have to do this, everyone else did this, so I'm here, I'm going to do this. You have to know why you're putting it in the paper.
Okay,
Okay?
for sure, appreciate that.
Yeah, yeah. Other questions, thoughts? Ideas, concerns, fears?
Minimal fear so far.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
At least right now.
All right. So, what I have given to you, and I had to finish it really quick because the class this morning also needed this, but I think it's in pretty decent shape. Maybe a couple of the images don't quite fit the page. But this is basically what's on the board right here, right? So it's, I'll put it up here so we can look at it together.
Vulnerability, self-worth, identity.
And I think you'll notice, if you haven't already, that although it looks very different, it's basically the same thing that the other outline is, right? But if you struggle with the outline that has all the Roman numerals, maybe this works for you. If the outline with all of the Roman numerals, if that works for you and you know that that's gonna help you the most, use that, right? So what we're doing is giving you tools that you have in your toolbox so that you can pull out the tool that works for you the best. Okay. So the first question here, again, let's just read it through, I guess. Let's just zoom in a bit. All right, so how to use this outline. Start by answering a couple of general questions. See below. After having considered the essay's prompt, okay? And then we looked at the essay's prompt, and actually, I asked you to kind of write a question in. So your answers to these questions are not set in stone, okay? So you might start off with an outline and you think you're going in one direction, but maybe you decide, oh wait, I don't want this topic for this paragraph. You realize something else is gonna work better. Just remain flexible. Allow yourself to make changes like that without stressing too much, because that's the nature of how we think, right? The more we understand something, the more we adjust how we think about it. These questions guide you towards a working thesis. The working thesis helps you head in the right direction as you consider your ideas and the evidence you plan to use. So, the key thing with a working thesis is it's not the end, it's the beginning. So one of the things I find myself writing sometimes on essay for my comments and stuff will be, you have really good ideas and you're heading in the right direction, right? But what that means is you didn't really get past the working thesis and into the deeper elements. Right? So you're on the way, but you just need to keep going. Okay. So, again, I think we talked about the essay as like, we can think of it as like a trial, right? A court trial. Does that sound familiar to you guys?
Correct.
Remember that?
Right.
Yes, no? I only see, no, okay, so let's just review it real quick. An essay, and actually the word essay, which comes from the French, means literally to try, right? And the one way we use the word try is to do our best, right? But the other one is to put something on trial. And so in an essay, we are putting our ideas on trial. So if you think of a trial in a court of law, the first thing that a lawyer does is give their opening statements. Does that sound right? Opening statements is like the thesis statement. Okay? And a jury, you're not trying to trick them into figuring out what you want to say. You tell them what you want them to know, right? You say, I am going to prove this to you. Right? That's essentially what your thesis needs to say. What is it that you're going to prove in this essay? Right? And then the topic sentences take parts of that overall argument and break them down so that they can see how every part of your argument can be supported. But first, we just have to ask ourselves, well, what are we going to prove, right? And so that's how we come up with that. How does Chiron experience love and belonging within a social system that shapes identity, vulnerability, and self-worth? Right? Even just having the question gives you a target. Crystal, you look like you have a question.
No, I'm just thinking.
Just thinking?
Thinking
Okay.
about what my thesis is.
Right? And so the question gives us a target because it's basically establishing our topics for our body paragraphs. Right? It's not the answer to what we're going to say with those, but we know those are the things we're going to talk about. And then once you have those topics, you bring in the evidence, just like you would in a trial. You can't just say, this is what I believe is true, so trust me, I know what I'm talking about. How many people are going to trust you if that's all you say? How many?
Not a lot.
Not a lot, right? I mean, that's basically what Trump is always doing these days, right? Just trust me. People have said, it's like what people? Right? He doesn't give evidence, and they actually, they're kind of masters at not telling you the truth. Okay, but we don't, let's not go there. It's my fault, I brought it up, but, once you have that answer, right, then you start to think about, okay, what are the topics that I need to discuss to support those ideas, to support what I want to prove? And then you think one topic per paragraph, right? So it's probably some sort of concept or theme that the film deals with. And then the paragraph is like, what do you want to prove about what the film is saying? Let me know if I'm going too fast here or if you have a question. And so it asks you to just kind of brainstorm those ideas. Right? It doesn't have to be in any specific order. Just get the puzzle pieces out of your head and onto the paper so you can see them a little bit easier. Now, once you have that, then you start thinking about how do you support each of those topics. Questions at all? Okay.
Okay, so for example, if I'm answering the first question, how does the presence or absence of love shape identity and self-worth? For one paragraph, I could talk about how it was for him with his, like, getting love, or his definition of love. And then a second body paragraph about his self-worth, like the lack of love.
Could be.
And then the third about how the poverty shaped him.
Mm-hmm, possibly.
And then the fourth would be about who he became as he got older, how that affected him.
So like his identity by
identity,
the
yes.
end or something?
Yes. Does that sound, are those good
Yeah.
topics? Okay.
It does.
Okay.
So, and I like that because, let's put it up there so you can see that this isn't the only option. So what were let's put them up there. What were yours?
The first one was a definition of love, what it is and what it's not.
Okay.
The second one was about his self-worth, which is the effect of, or the lack of love.
The third one is the effect of love?
No, that was the second one, sorry.
Okay, so, okay.
And the third one was about how poverty, that shaped his identity. Like basically, yeah. And the fourth one is also about identity, but it's about like who he chose to be, like versus who he was forced to be. And the third. Well,
So that's a perfectly valid option.
mhm.
The one thing that I can imagine with this one is that you need more than one paragraph on this.
Mhm.
Like a paragraph that shows how he was forced.
Actually, the fourth one is just about who he chose to be, like his chosen identity. The
Okay.
third one was about the identity that he was forced to be.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, so if I can ask a question,
Mm-hmm.
because what he chooses
Mm-hmm.
is complicated. So what are you saying about, at least right now, right?
Mhm.
I know we're all in the starting, like, stages here, but what identity do you wanna say he chose?
Like, he chose to be like a drug dealer and like to be like this big tough guy and like to basically be the opposite of what he was when he was a teenager.
Okay, and why does he do that?
Because he doesn't want to be seen as like weak anymore,
Mm-hmm.
and he was basically kind of,
You basically manned up.
yeah, and he grew up.
That's the word I wanna avoid.
Oh.
Manning up means, we use it in our culture,
Mhm.
we're like, man up means,
Toughen up.
be a man, yeah, toughen up. I think that's a problem in our culture.
Mm,
We're
Grew
telling
up.
people to man up means stop being a pussy, right? I mean, that's the intention. And what that means is, you're being like a girl.
Mm.
Don't show your emotions, right? So, and the reason, and that's why I'm kind of asking there, not that you're going this way, but
Mhm.
that he chooses that,
Mhm.
but I don't think the film thinks he should choose that.
Mm.
And I don't think Juan would want him to choose that.
He traded to him.
So that seems to me there's another element to talk about.
Okay.
Yes,
Sorry, when you said man up, I was gonna ask, like, doesn't it also mean act mature too, or it's different?
yes it can, for sure. It's not necessarily always a negative thing, but generally the people that I hear say man up are macho type people, right? That they think being a man first and then everything else after that, that's what they see as mature. I'm more of a feminist, I guess, where I see that there's a lot of problems with being a man. And I don't want to be a man. Many of the men that I've known in my life, I have hated because of who they were, right? And it's because of those traits. So why can't you have vulnerability? Why can't you talk about your emotions? Why can't you look at art? You know, all of those things. So I'm getting on a soapbox here, I don't mean to do that. So with this, go ahead, because I kind of want to hear, since we said that, your response.
No, well, I was kind of based off what you said, like Black, he ends up being like falling into that vulnerability, like at the ending scene with Kevin, and you can see that he puts his walls down.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So potentially we have two paths here.
Mm-hmm.
What he's chosen, but what ultimately Kevin teaches him,
Mm-hmm.
right? That just because we chose it, it shows agency, right? And he's protecting himself. And I think we all see that as a positive thing. But in order for him to protect himself, he had to become a drug dealer, right? So is that ultimately positive? Right? Don't think Juan would think that. His mom doesn't think that, even though she was an addict for most of her life.
Oh yeah, and Juan, he was actually kind of like ashamed about it too,
Yes,
when he had asked him, like,
Right.
why did you sell drugs to my mom? Mhm. Yeah,
yeah.
So he didn't want
He
that.
looks like he's about to cry
yeah.
in that scene.
I don't think he wouldn't have wanted it for him.
No, not at all. Because he really is a father figure,
Mm-hmm.
and the ideal father figure, anyways, wants their child to grow and do better than they did.
But at the end, Tyrone, now Black, followed Tom's footsteps when he became a drug dealer.
Exactly, right? And it shows how important Juan is in his life, right? But he started learning one lesson from Juan, and once Juan was gone, all he had left was his memories of Juan. So he starts to model himself out of Juan, but not from the things that Juan wanted to teach him.
I always think that if he didn't have Juan, if he had Juan, he turned into the drug dealer. But if he would have just stuck with his Juan, maybe he would have been a drug user.
Exactly, right?
So,
And there's almost a class shift between those two things, right?
yeah.
Are you, in that beginning of the film, that guy, right, who's clearly in his 50s or 60s trying to buy drugs from the kid,
Oh yeah.
right? He knows Juan. He's like, you're my man, Juan, because they grew up together. But he's totally dependent on trying to get drugs, and because of his need for the drugs, he doesn't have any money, right? He's learned to lie and steal, right? Because it turns out, oh, he does have money. He just doesn't want to give it to the guy. But then he gives him, finally he gives in and says, okay, here. And he's like, man, okay. And then they hook him up, right? Versus somebody like Juan, right? Not a great world or life, doesn't necessarily want to be in it. But what options is someone like Juan given in the inner city? Right? The economy of the inner city is drugs. That's where all the jobs are, right? The drug system is just like Amazon. It has its distribution centers, right? It employs a lot of people.
Yeah, there's problems too.
So, but what it does, I think, as a film, that's not something necessarily you have to talk about here. This film talks, although there's no overt like white person being racist against any of the characters, but they exist within a systemically racist culture, right? So the reason why there's poverty, the reason why there's no job opportunities is because they're not allowed to come outside of that system, right? And so they've learned to make a system work for them, right? And so, like growing up as a kid, I'm a privileged white dude, right? I have the privilege of being a man, of being white, of being educated, right? And so when you're young, you're not thinking about all those things, right? And so you hear about drug dealing, you hear about people killing each other, and you're like, that's just wrong. Why are they doing that? But when you start thinking about this, what's their choice? What's their option? Right? Who's teaching them that there's something else to do? Right? And I think what's beautiful about the film is that's what Juan's trying to do. But Juan is in that system. And the lifespan of someone like Juan in that position is probably 30 to 35, statistically. Because of all that violence, right? And that plays out. I think that's one of the reasons Juan just disappears. Because that's what happens. People are constantly, because of this, what's happening? Breaking up, breaking down, right? Getting shot. Again, I feel like I've gotten on a soapbox. But, so I guess I'll just say this to be explicit. I think before we make judgments on people, we really have to understand where they're coming from. Juan is a really good human being
Despite his
in a
background.
fucked up world, right? He's doing what he has to do to survive, but he's trying to help somebody else survive in a way that he hopefully doesn't have to do what Juan did, right? And I think that's one of the things about this film that works against stereotype, because so many movies reinforce the idea that, like the first time I saw this movie, because I didn't know much about it. In fact, it was like when I first met my girlfriend, and she said, "Oh, I love this movie. Let's watch this." And so I just watched it, right? I had no idea what it was going to be about. That first scene when Juan pulls up and the drug deals, you're like, oh, okay. Drug gang movie, right? And then so Juan is the kingpin, so he's gonna be the hard, heavy one, right? He's the star of the show. But then all of a sudden, it switches from Juan, and we see who is the actual
Little now
Star?
then black.
right? And so Little, the interesting thing is, we meet Chiron for the first time looking at the back of him running like a maniac, right? They don't give us who he is up front, because his identity in the beginning of the film is a target. By the end, and that last moment, it's about someone who is allowing himself to be vulnerable for the first time in 10 years.
And he feels safe
And he feels safe.
versus the first thing, which is the complete opposite.
Where he was not safe anywhere he went. There was no home that he was safe at. Outside he wasn't safe. Even if he found a place to hide, it was broken glass and drug paraphernalia. But see how thinking conceptually about these things takes you to these ideas. If you're just thinking like little guy, middle guy, older guy, it's not that you can't get to those ideas, but it doesn't open up things in conceptually the way that this can. Okay, I'm hearing a lot of sighs. No. I think it's overwhelming, right? How much there is to say.
You know, I've taken classes like this. Before this, I mean, I just learned like a movie's a movie, you know, like there's a story behind it. But now with classes like this, there's so much more analysis to the film than just like entertaining the audience. There's actual message in it. Like it changed my perspective with movies.
That's good, yeah. Because I think even Marvel films, which are primarily entertainment, they still are telling stories, right? And sometimes they're good stories, and sometimes we should maybe question the story that they're telling.
Elio was a very bad movie, honestly, personally.
Which one?
Elio, Disney Pixar.
I don't think I know that.
Just a lot of bad reviews with the movie in general, and I kind of agree with it.
But that doesn't necessarily mean it's good or bad message. Right?
Yeah.
So, do any of you guys watch The Boys?
The
Oh, you've
Amazon
seen
show?
what?
Yeah.
I think it's the Christopher
You're talking about the Amazon show?
I
Big
fucking
Bad
love
Guys.
that show, but it's a superhero show, but it's a superhero show from the perspective of what if all of these superheroes that are supposed to be so heroic and protective behind the scenes are really fucked up people. Right? So there's a character there, like kind of the main character who's kind of modeled after Superman. Homelander. And he's a monster, right? In so many ways, growing up, like for me, growing up, I mean, I was a kid, a little boy, right? So you debate, who's the better superhero, like Batman or Superman, right? I always liked Batman more, and I always thought Superman was too perfectly patriotic.
Yeah.
Until that new Superman movie came out.
Well, yeah, but that's because Superman gets a certain reputation, and people are like, that's just unrealistic, right? Whereas someone like Batman is flawed, and although trying to do good,
Sorry about that.
comes to it from a point of revenge, right? Because of what happened to his family.
There's been debate.
Spider-Man, he's also fine.
Exactly, right? And our culture, because of who we are now, that's why our superheroes show flaws. After World War II, people didn't want flawed heroes, they wanted real heroes. Or what I would put quotation marks around that.
Fiction.
I thought I heard something. Yeah.
So question, so what you're saying is that popular heroes or heroes that are well received by my society are those that are not really idealistically perfect, but those who we can relate to.
I think it's this is kind of a philosophical thing that we're getting a little bit off topic, but I think films reflect the culture's time, history, right? And so watching a film from a certain time period can kind of tell us what did the culture think about and value at that time. But it can also reflect it back to us in a way that we can analyze and understand it. Right? I think the best art, and I include films, music, paintings, whatever art, the best art doesn't just entertain us or give us something beautiful, it gives us a way to understand the world that we might not have thought about before we got that piece of art. Alright, I'm gonna shut up about that. Are you guys seeing how this handout that we gave you can be helpful?
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Again, if the other one works better and you like that and you're comfortable with it, don't change it up. But if you struggle with that kind of format, maybe this one will help. And it's fundamentally the way my mind works and the way Julie's mind works. Right? And as teachers, we're just like all human beings in this class. We all learn things in slightly different ways. Right? And so we need to find what works for us. All right, so how are we doing time?
10:53.
Okay, so let's take a 10-minute break. When we come back, just start working on whatever you're working on.